During the week I was lucky enough to be gifted a whole collection of acrylic ink. There are some Liquitex ones, Magic Color and FW from Rowney. I've used white and sepia acrylic ink in line and wash work, but I've never really used acrylic inks. So what I want to do is swatch these all out, look at their performance. I know FW has a brilliant reputation, but I don't know how the Magic Color and the Liquitex will compare. So maybe they'll be as good or maybe they'll be dreadful. And then when we've done that, I want to see whether, if I dilute them down, whether they can behave like watercolour. And I hope that'll show us projects where they might come into their own and be better than watercolour, and projects where watercolour's going to win out. My name's Liz Chadderton. I'm a watercolour artist based in Berkshire. And every week I bring you a tip or trick that I wish I'd known about ages ago. And this week it's all about acrylic inks and whether they can be used like watercolour. And here they all are. And by acrylic ink, that means it's artist pigments in a suspension of acrylic emulsion. So ordinary drawing ink is dye based and therefore they fade with UV light if they're exposed, whereas because these are pigment in acrylic, they should be really permanent even under exposure to UV, and they will not be water soluble. Once they're dry, they should be fixed. So we'll test that out. But let's just have a quick look at the packaging, and they all seem to go for a very similar sort of approach. So the Liquitex is 30 millilitres, 1 fluid ounce. The Magic Color is 28, and the FW is 29.5. They also all go for the sort of squeezy eyedropper in lid. This is obviously quite an old one. It's a bit solidified. I'm going to have to give that a good stir and see what happens. I have noticed on some of the older ones that the actual dropper bit has come separated out from the lid. They don't seem to be leaking, so I don't think that's going to be a problem. The other thing I noticed is that this is a Magic Color and presumably a very old one, an old design. When I open it, it's got a really weird smell. So I don't know if that's gone off. Can it go off? I'm going to give it a try and see what happens. If we look at the information on them, this says it can be used with airbrush, technical pens, brush and pen. It's water resistant and non-clogging. Similarly on the FW Rowney, we've got little symbols which basically say airbrush, it can be poured, it can be used with a brush, it can be used with something that looks like a marker pen, a technical pen and a dip pen. Read up on their websites. I'm a bit scared about this, that they can go in fountain pens. I would have thought they would clog fountain pens, but apparently they don't. Price wise, the Liquitex, when I checked, was about £4.20 for a bottle. The Magic Color was about £4.50 and the FW was about £5.30. So they're in the same ballpark, but FW is the most expensive. I've got all my stash of gifted inks here, and I want to see how transparent or opaque they are, see how they look on paper. So what I've done is put 2 lines of waterproof Indian ink, because then when I swatch over them, I'll be able to see how transparent they are. And I'm just going to swatch them out and see what sort of colours we've got, and then we'll put a few more tests for them. I'll speed this up for you so that you don't get too bored. I'm starting with the Quasar Black. I'm really pleased with how black it is compared to the Indian ink. And then going on to warm grey, which is nice actually, quite sort of, yeah, warm and grey. Can't really say much more about it. The earth brown that I'm just about to do was again a very nice warm brown. I'm really pleased with the brightness and the clarity that I'm seeing in the colours here. This golden sand, which is the Magic Color one, is almost like a quinacridone gold, which is one of my favourites, of course. The olive, the Grecian olive, again is a nice sort of quite gungy green. And then the gamma green I'm about to try is like a phthalo green. My disappointment is that there isn't a French ultramarine, but this is the cobalt blue, and actually it's a very warm, almost ultramarine kind of blue. This is processed cyan, which is like a phthalo blue, which again is really bright and clear. And then we've got Delta Violet, which is like dioxazine violet, so that's great. The magenta is good, so it's this Magic Color has got the processed colours, so I should find mixing a lot of colours from the magenta, yellow and cyan really good. The scarlet's really bright. Now this is the old pot of warm red that I said smelt funny, and when I put it, it was just didn't seem to have any pigment in it. I thought maybe it needed a really good shake. You can see me really giving it a good shake. And it's just a bit funny. I think it's gone off, so I am going to chuck it out. The orange is beautifully clear, very transparent, loving that. And then there's the processed yellow that I think will be good for mixing. And then I'm so intrigued to see how opaque this white is. You know we're always looking for an opaque white, and that looks pretty good. So it's noticeably thicker than the others. So the FW white I thought was a bit pathetic, and then I was worried that it just sort of congealed again. So I am just putting another layer on, and now I'm going to test out the FWs. I did something wrong here. I thought that was meant to be sepia, and it doesn't look like sepia. I must have picked up the wrong pot. The scarlet is a very orangey red. It's really quite close to the orange in the Magic Color. Do like that crimson, that's a really nice colour. The red earth is quite subtle, which is good because all these are really clear colours, and you're going to have to work hard to actually get some subtlety and some nuance into your work. The light green, which is this one, is very lurid, but the marine blue, the next one I'm using, is a beautiful turquoisey blue. And then I'm just going to try Liquitex, and this is turquoise deep, and it's actually very close to the marine blue. Finally, this is a mystery one. The label's disappeared, but I reckon it's sepia. Everything's dried now, and I had another go with that warm red because it was really odd when I tried to put it on here. And I give the bottle a really good shake and I stirred it up, and do you know what? It smells funny, and I just think it's gone off. I did have another go with sepia because I looked at this and I thought, I don't know why that's called sepia. I think I picked up totally the wrong bottle and swatched out the wrong colour there, because when I did sepia again, that's the colour and that's what I would expect. And that mystery bottle that I really don't know what it is, it looks pretty similar, so I think that's a sepia as well. Anyway, let's just look at the two whites. So this is FW white that most people are really positive about. But looking at it, the Lunar white from Magic Color is more opaque. It covers more of that black line. And I am really pleasantly surprised on all these colours about how transparent they are. I really thought they'd be loads more opaque. So I think these are going to be super for using in a very watercolour way. And the other thing I'm quite impressed with is how black the Quasar Black from Magic Color is, because against the pure black of my Indian ink, it's holding its own pretty well. It's got a slight bluey tinge to it. So what? I'm also just liking some of these marks where I've swatched out and whether it's sort of feathering back in, and I think that is going to be really good. So I'm excited to try some watercolour techniques. We've swatched out all those beautiful colours and we've seen there didn't seem to be much difference in terms of quality between the Magic Color and the FW. They all seem to be really rather beautiful. So now it's time to see how versatile they are, and I thought I would try some pens, some wet and wet work, see whether maybe salt actually works with these like we do with watercolour, and then look at layering and lifting. I'm really quite scared about this. It says that you can use these inks with a fountain pen, and I've got my Lamy Safari pen, so it's not a hugely expensive one, but it's one I'm really fond of, and I'm going to put ink in it. I always thought that non-fountain pen inks would clog, so basically let's see. I'm going to have to wash this out super carefully afterwards, not leave that acrylic in there. Oops, I was just going to try and put the pink lid on there. It might take a little while to flow through. Oh no, it won't. Oh my goodness, that works. Oh, let's do Liz Chatterton. Well, that flows really rather nicely. Oh, I'm quite excited by that, because if you remember the black that I showed you, don't know where it is, was really quite black. So to get a waterproof black ink that will work in my fountain pen could be a bit of a game changer. This I am not so scared about, because I'm just going to try absolute standard dip pen. This is a Magic Color. Oh, and sorry, let's just write my name again. Sorry about this. I'm not being egotistical. I just didn't know what else to write. But yeah, as the manufacturers said, dip pen, no problem. And then I've got a glass pen. If you've not come across a glass dip pen, I've done a whole video about it. They are gorgeous because one, they're really pretty. This is full of glitter. But two, they are just so surprising. They give a really fine mark and it goes on for ages. And you wouldn't think glass could hold that much. And yet, look, one dip and it does. Give a better dip than that. Would have to be careful dipping like I am into the ink bottle, because the big danger is you clonk it down and you break the tip of your glass pen, which you wouldn't. Ooh, that somewhat splurged there. So it works with a dip pen, a glass pen and the fountain pen. Let's have a look at wet and wet work and just see how these colours spread and merge on the page. So I am just wetting that with clean water, and I will use oh come on, that's gorgeous. Look at those. So look how it spreads through the oh, look, I've painted a little tree with roots all by itself. Look how it spreads through the water. So that was the Magic Color, some sort of earth brown it was called. This is the FW Crimson. Let's see how our Liquitex turquoise goes. Oh, lovely. And let's see how they sort of spread out and merge rather than just me blobbing them around. So merging wet in wet, moving through the water. Very happy with that. So dropping in that clean water does form the sort of very distinctive cauliflower's watermarks that you would expect to see with watercolour. What I want to see is when this dries, does it have any shine to it like acrylic does? Now, what I am interested in was whether using sprinkled in salt will work in this. So I've just wet that area, only because I wanted this to be a wash rather than blobs. So that is the Process Magenta from Magic Color. Let that just settle a little bit until the sheen starts to go, and then I'm going to sprinkle salt. So here comes the salt. It's just ordinary table salt, and I'm going to sprinkle that in and see whether we get the lovely typical snowflake pattern that we would get with watercolour. Now I do know that with watercolour different pigments work in different ways, but I would have expected a sort of magenta colour to react pretty well with salt. And in this area, in fact I've still got a bit of magenta on that, I want to see how well they layer. So I'm going to just, that's probably a bit dark, oh no, it might be okay, put magenta there. Then I'm going to use the Process Yellow and the Process Blue and see how they overlap, but each layer needs to be dry first. So this is dry, and I'm just going to wet the next circle, and because this is so strong I've really got to be careful, so just put in a drop. Maybe I've been a bit too careful there, but you can see in the overlap we're getting an orangey colour, which is pretty nice. I might put in just a tiny bit more to try and get this circle of a similar tone to the pink circle. I've just gone a little bit pale there. Okay, yeah, that's probably better. So then I need to let that dry, and then I'll do a blue circle and we'll see how that goes. But just as a sneak peek, let's look back at this, the salt, and it's definitely working. That's very exciting. Right, that circle is dry, so let's wet our third circle there. You know, if I was painting with these, I'd have them out in a palette, but I'm just trying to be quite economical with my paints and just see how they work. So let's have a look here. So we can really see the layering of those colours, the transparency of the colours, and how we can get the orange from the pink and the yellow or the purple there, that they definitely add up. The interesting thing to see, of course, is about lifting, and we would expect, if this is dry, for none of that colour to move, which it doesn't, because these are acrylics, so they are waterproof once dry. I wonder whether Magic Eraser will make any difference. So if you've not come across Magic Eraser, I've done a whole film about it. It's a sponge, a melamine sponge that you can use for lifting. You have to be really careful on watercolour paper because it almost acts like a sandpaper. So you dampen it in clean water, squeeze it out, then you can rub and it will lift your paint. But if you do more than, say, 1, 2, 3, it will actually damage the surface of your paper. So you do need to be gentle and not rough. 1, 2, 3. Interesting. A tiny bit has come off with the Magic Eraser. Let's just lift. So it has made it slightly paler, and sorry, where was it? Ah, I've lost it. Tiny bit, I can just see a bit of pink. So you might be able to do a very slight adjustment. But in watercolour, if I wanted to, you know, I can see I obviously went over the lines here. I could go back and tidy that up. I'm not going to be able to do that here, which is a strength and a weakness. So the strength is, if you want to do multiple layers of colour without muddying the bottom ones, acrylic inks used like watercolour really going to work for you. If on the other hand you like to adjust and soften things off and do all that sort of stuff with watercolour, you're going to find this frustrating. Say you'd painted that and you wanted a soft edge to it, we would need to soften it straight away, and look, you can get a nice soft edge, and you could, you know, pull that out and soften that off as much or as little as you want. In watercolour, if we let this dry, we could do exactly the same on that hard edge. But with the acrylics, once it's dry, it's dry. So any softening we're doing needs to be done while it's wet. Time for conclusions. From this practice, I would say I can't see much difference in the quality of these three inks. They are all beautiful, transparent apart from the white, flow absolutely beautifully through the water, do all the things that we love from watercolour, like blooms and reacting with the salt and so forth. They layer perfectly. The potential downside of that is that you've got to know whether you want a soft edge or a hard edge as you put them down. So if I was working on a project that needed multiple layers without losing transparency, I think that these inks could be absolutely wonderful. If I'm working on something a little more ethereal that needs lots of lost edges and soft edges, I think watercolour is where I would stick with. I've had a whole pile of fun trying out these new media, and I hope you found that really useful too.